Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week. We're finishing metaphysics, talking about personal identity. This week, I'm going to have things slightly different, I think. I'm going to try and divvy up. We're going to talk about 4 different views on personal identity. And so I'm planning on trying to make 4 shorter lectures, four shorter videos, so that you have access to go through each one and you don't have to, skip around as much. So this first one, we're going to be talking about Descartes and the Cartesian view of mind or the soul. But first, let's just jump right into talking about personal identity. Before you watch this lecture, if you haven't already, please go and do your position paper. Your position paper basically on personal identity, answering the question what you think you are sort of most fundamentally. And I'd like you to fill that out. It's just a paragraph, just sort of writing down your thoughts. It doesn't have to be, up to snuff. It's not like writing your actual papers. It's just a pass. Did you do it? Did you not do it for the points? And but that'll be helpful for getting some thoughts down on paper for what kind of view you think is true. And then later when we get to actually writing the paper on this section, you'll have some thoughts to reflect back on. So do that and then come back and finish watching this. So let's go. Personal identity. What is it that makes you you? So after last week, we talked about persistence over time. And we were left with kind of, at least a little bit of a puzzle or question about what it is that makes a particular individual the kind of thing that it is persist over time, right? So, some answers to the persistence over time question result in things in thinking things like, well, maybe you don't persist over time, or maybe the ship doesn't persist over time, or maybe there's space-time worms or something like that. But at the very least, it seems pretty obvious that you persist over time. And so there's questions as to like what exactly is going on when a person persists over time. And that's what we need to worry about when it comes to personal identity, right? So persons, first of all, like what are persons? You are a person, I am a person, we're all persons. And persons seem to continue to exist over time, right? It seems like, me yesterday, you tomorrow, same, me today and tomorrow and yesterday, all the same person. You today, tomorrow, and yesterday, all the same person. So what makes it the case that you are the same person over time? Now, Heraclitus here, an ancient Greek philosopher, once said that no man steps in the same river twice. And by that, he, in a sense, kind of meant, look, like rivers are constantly changing, the water is constantly flowing. So it's really just, it's never the same river. But then he added also, and he's not the same man, right? The idea being that, time changes you. And so if you step in the river, a river once, and then you come back and try to step in the same river, you'll have been changed. And so you're not the same person. In a way, Heraclitus might be right. Obviously you change, but that's not the kind of thing that we're worried about here. We're interested in what it is about you that stays the same. And you can sort of see in this quote here that Heraclitus gives, no man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man. The word he there refers back to the first person, the person that stepped in the river in the first place. And if he's not the same exact person, that is like Leibniz's law, numerical identity, if he's not exactly the same person, then that he there doesn't seem to be referring to the same guy. Like that just doesn't make any sense. You can't say this sentence without there being one individual person that we're talking about, stepping in the river twice. And so there's got to be something that's the same. There's got to be something that's the same. And that's what what our question is. What's the same? What is it that's the same between that person and the person now? So first, why the heck does it matter? Why should we worry about personal identity over time? Well, if there was no personal identity over time, that is, if it was never the case that someone at one time was the same person as they, at another time, then things would start to get really weird in the world, partly having to do with like, you know, um, moral responsibility, just general responsibility, how we treat individuals, like all sorts of things are going to go out the window, right? If there's no such thing as personal identity over time, that is, no one is ever the same person from time A to time B, then we couldn't hold people accountable, right? If person, if person A at time A said, like they made you a promise, right? They were like, oh, I'll meet you for coffee 3 days from now. And then, 3 days from now, you're sitting there waiting for them to show up to coffee, and um, they never show up. And then you see them on the street, and you're like, hey, you didn't show up for coffee. Well, they could just simply be, that was a different person, right? I'm not the same person that I was 3 days ago. So, it wasn't me that, that promised to meet you for coffee. So you can't hold me accountable. That seems nuts, right? That just seems like a terrible consequence of the thought that personal identity, that there is no personal identity. So yeah, we wouldn't be able to make promises. We wouldn't be able to have contracts. Like we couldn't get married to each other, right? Because the day after you get married, now you've got a new person next to you. You couldn't own anything, right? Because personal property requires that there is the same person over time. I mean, like if somehow a person shifts from day to day or time to time, how can the person before bought the thing, you didn't buy the thing, right? Like if you're not the same person, that seems problematic. And then similarly, just certain kinds of rights, right? It seems like I mean, imagine your rights are violated, like somebody enslaves you on day at time t. Well, at time t, t3, a few days later, it's not that they didn't enslave, they enslaved that person, right? They didn't enslave you. You're a different person than at time, the person at time t1. So ultimately, philosophers like, there are some philosophers that deny the existence of personal identity in a sense. They say like, well, look, personal identity doesn't really exist. Really, there isn't such a thing as the same person over time. But they can't really deny the persistence over time of you or of individuals, right? I mean, something surely is persisting over time, right? We've got the same body in a sense from birth till death. We've got something like the same mind or mental capacities or consciousnesses from over time from birth till death. There's something continuous that's going on. Even if we're changing our parts or going to sleep or getting knocked out, or if we have some really intense traumatic experience and or undergo some kind of mind altering substance, like even though all of these things can happen to us, it seems that there's got to be something that's the same between the beginning and the end of you, right? And whatever that thing is, it's something that's interesting and something that we should try to capture and think about and talk about, because at the very least, it seems like the kind of thing that we are talking about when we talk about you, when we say like, oh, we're talking about somebody's life, we're talking about living a good life over time. We want to be talking about a particular individual's life. And well, what is it for a particular individual to have a life, to be the individual that has the life? Well, that's the kind of thing that we're interested in here. That's why personal identity matters. Now, there are, I'd say, four major views, and we're going to look at the four major views in this week of personal identity over time. Or, I mean, a personal identity, and then of sort of there's a different question. There's one question that says like, what is it for you to persist over time as a person? There's another question, and this is the question kind of at the base of what it is for you to persist over time. And that's the question of what the heck are you anyways? Like, what are you? What is it to be a person? What is it to be me? What is it to be you? And there are 4 different answers to this question that are commonly thought of. They roughly break into 2 camps. There's mind views and there's body views. The mind views are broken into 2 here, and you get these 2 general views. You get the view of the Cartesian soul. So remember back to Descartes. Descartes thought that we were thinking things. He offers up the idea that really in the end what we are these like mental substances that we think we have these things like souls or something like that, and that's what you and I are. We're going to talk about that in a minute, so I'll leave it at that. Another mind view is the Lockean psychology view. According to the Lockean psychology view, which is the next one we'll look at, what you are is your consciousness. You are your conscious self, and plus maybe all of your memories. And over time, as long as you are psychologically connected, conscious over time, then what you are is just to be this thing that is psychologically connected and has all of the same memories. It's an interesting view. It has a lot of problems. I think that there's something going for it, but we'll talk about it. Then the next family of views, the body views, there's 2 kind of, I'd say, major contenders for the body view, animalism and the brain view. Animalism is the view that says, well, what I am, what I am most fundamentally is this human animal, right? Like, there's exactly where I am is where a human animal exists. And because I am here, then I must be a human animal. And so that's just what it is. Like what it is for me to be me is for me to be this human animal. And then the other view that's popular is the brain view, right? And this, brings in a little bit of science fiction-y type stuff, but we've already kind of thought about this with the thinking about the brain in a vat. And the brain view says something like, well, look, what I am is not this animal, it's this part of my body. It's like, and maybe it's, it's an embedded part of my body, but it is a part of my body. Like what I am is this brain. I am a brain inside of a body. If you pulled my brain out and stuck it someone else's body, then, I would follow around my brain. And what I am ultimately is a brain, or a brain of an animal. So, that's the body view, and we'll talk about that. Each of these views has problems. Finally, there's the possibility that we're something other than these things, right? There's like various combinatorial views that say, oh, we're both minds and bodies, or views that say, no, we're something even beyond that. And those views are interesting and worth thinking about, but we don't have time to really like focus in on them here. All right, so the setup from here on out is kind of going to be like this, right? Each of the following views is one take on what you are most fundamentally. So you should think of each of these as trying to answer the same question, but they're going to give different answers, right? The question is, what are you? What is it to be you? What is it for you to exist and exist over time? And each view is going to be like, oh, well, what you are is a soul, or what you are is a psychologically continuous entity, or what you are is an animal, or what you are is a brain. And what we're going to do here from here on for this week is I'm going to present each of these views and then give an argument against the view, right? So I'm going to present the view and try to make it sound plausible, and then present what seems to me to be the most plausible argument against the view. And I'm going to give that argument. And each of the arguments that I give against the view is going to be valid. What that means is that the argument is such that if the premises are true, then the conclusion necessarily follows. That is, if the premises, if you think the premise is correct, then you can't deny the conclusion. So what that means further is that if you don't like the argument, if you think that the argument's a bad argument against the view, or you really like the view and you think like, oh man, I like this view, you're going to have to deal with the argument. You're going to have to deal with the argument, and the way that you're going to deal with the argument is by finding one of the premises in the argument that you think is false. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can do that, like how you can take a particular premise and think, oh, that premise must be false, how you can deny the premise, and then like what kinds of considerations you should think of in attempting to deny that premise and come up with, your own kind of view. Here at this point, yeah, I want you to, pay attention to this and think about how this ought to work, because ultimately this is how your next paper is going to be. I mean, this is what your final paper is going to be on. I think, I guess just technical aside, I'm pretty sure, I think I've decided at this point, originally at the beginning of this class, I think I said that there was going to be 4 papers. I think I'm going to back out on that. And then, there's 3 papers. There'll be 3 papers, too much extra work. And then there will be a 4th paper, which will be the final exam. And you only have to take it if you want to take it. You can write me basically another paper if you think, if your grade is suffering and you really need a boost, you can write the final exam paper, and that will boost your grade. It'll only help you if you do that. It can't hurt you. That doesn't mean you can just turn in a pile of junk though, and have it help you. If you turn in a pile of junk, the paper just won't do anything, won't affect your grade, and you'll have worked on it for nothing. All right, so let's move on to the Cartesian soul. So Descartes, as we talked in the past in his famous Meditations, postulates a soul, a mind, a mental entity. And ultimately, I think this is kind of the most common view in the world of what it is that you and I actually are. That what you and I are is some kind of entity distinct from our bodies that is in control of our bodies. So here, in this picture, we've got a little ghost thing driving the mind. So very common view is that I am a soul. Now, Descartes basically thought sort of along these lines, right? He offers up after doing his little thought experiment, the cogito, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, right? And that's something that he decides that in the end he just can't deny. It's something that's indubitable. It's a belief of his that he knows, and he's sure that he knows it. It's some certain knowledge. And from this, he derives that he is a thinking thing, right? From his ultimate, his little quest into his own mind. He realizes while he's doing this, attempt at doubting everything that he believes, that he can't, that he can doubt that he has a body. He can doubt that he is extended in space and maybe even time, but that he can't doubt that he's a thinking thing. He can't doubt that he's thinking because, he figures out that if he's doubting, then that is, something that's thinking is going on. And so he must be a thinking thing. So he figures and derives from the cogito that he is essentially a thinking thing. That is, he thinks well, if I ceased to be a thinking thing, I would cease to exist. If I exist, it seems to me like I have a body, but it seems possible to me that my body could go out of existence. But as long as there was still thinking going on, then I wouldn't have gone out of existence, right? So if there's still thinking, even without a body, I must not be my body. I must be a thinking thing. So he figures out that he's essentially a thinking thing, where, remember, an essential property is a kind of property that makes you the kind of thing that you are. So for Descartes, the idea here is what I am essentially is a thinking thing, a thinking substance. And so that's, the being a thinking thing is the kind of property that makes me the kind of thing that I am. But so what exactly is a thinking thing? Well, according to the Cartesian dualist picture of the world, there are 2 kinds of substance. Substances, remember, are the kinds of things that, objects are, right? Particular entities of particular kinds of things out there in the world, right? So for Descartes, there are these two kinds of substance out in the world. There's the physical substance and the mental substance. The physical substance is the kind of stuff that you normally causally interact with, right? It's extended in time and space. It has physical properties like shape, weight, color, texture, etc. Mental substances, on the other hand, are not located in space or time. They don't have, weight or size. They have very different kinds of properties. They have the kinds of properties that are involved in thinking, right? They're the kinds of things that think. So, a mental substance is the kind of thing that can have an emotion, can have a belief, can, have a desire, can form an intention. So, answering the question, what are you? Descartes thinks, well, each of us is a mental substance that's connected to a physical body. So, your mind is in control, and you are your mind or soul. You are a mental substance distinct from your body. All right, so view is relatively plausible, I think. It postulates the soul. Lots of people believe in souls for various reasons, some religious and some not. Descartes offers this whole set of ways of thinking in order to try and ground the thought that, a soul exists not merely on the basis of some religious thinking. And he postulates, all of this on the basis of his cogito, his one belief that he thinks is necessarily true, that he's certain of. But some problems arise for Descartes' view, particularly, Descartes' view that what we are is a mind and not a body, and that our mind and body are ultimately distinct. And the biggest problem that arises, it was posed to him by one of his students. So Descartes, back in the day, philosophers didn't have cushy university jobs. Not that I have a cushy university job. I work pretty hard, and my job isn't very cushy yet at all. You don't really get cushy jobs unless you end up at big universities and work there for years and years and years. But Descartes basically was a tutor while he was, alive, and he tutored some somewhat famous people. So Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia was one of his students, and one of his, rather genius students. She's, still sort of famous partly for this objection that she raised to Descartes. And he being a good teacher, taught Princess Elizabeth about the mind body dualist view, and she responded in a letter to him, confused, wondering about how the mind and the body could possibly interact given that they were distinct substances. So think about it like this. On the dualist picture, surely physical substances can cause physical events, right? So imagine you've got two billiard balls on a table, you roll one billiard ball into the other, and, bang, the billiard balls collide and then they move. One moves and the other one gets deflected. Now, this seems rather straightforward, right? We've got two physical substances there. We've got one billiard ball and another billiard ball. They're the same shape, size, weight. They're in different locations. And when one is pushed in one direction and hits the other one, it, causes a physical event. Great. Mental substances, similarly, can also cause mental events, right? So imagine you've got a particular mental substance that has a belief, right? A belief that, say, there's food in the refrigerator, and a desire to, eat a sandwich. And from that belief and that desire, those, mentally can combine into forming an intention, right? An intention. Oops, I spelled that wrong. It should be with a T, not an S. An intention to make a sandwich. Well, that seems fine, right? So we've got this mental thing that's going on in our minds. beliefs and desires creating intentions. But for Princess Elizabeth's objection to go through, how can a mental substance cause a physical event? It just doesn't seem plausible, right? Like a mental substance is non-physical. It doesn't have any causal, like physical causal powers. So, like imagine, just think about what's going on when I raise my arm. Um, when I raise my arm, it seems like my mind is telling my arm to go up. But if my mind is a mental substance and has no physical components, then there's no mechanistic explanation that goes from backwards from my arm raising up back up to, a connection to my mind, right? My mind would have to have some kind of physical capability to jumpstart the entire physical process that is my arm going up in order for it to make sense to think about a mental substance causing a physical event. But if my mind has physical properties, physical capabilities, then it's not a purely physical substance or a purely mental substance. It would be something mental that's also partly physical. And according to Descartes, we're definitely not physical substances, because he thinks it's possible to imagine cases in which we don't have bodies, but we're still a thinking thing. Similarly, on the other side, it's unclear how a physical event could ever cause a mental event, right? Like think about hurting yourself, like you stub your toe. When you accidentally kick a rock and stub your toe, there's a physical process that happens in your toe that sends electrical signals all the way up to your brain. But if your brain and your mind are distinct entities, right? Your brain is clearly a physical substance, but if your mind is this mental substance that's distinct from the physical parts of your body, it's unclear how some physical, chemical, electrical reactions in your brain could then cause something to happen in your mind, right? I mean, physical, chemical, and electrical reactions are not, mental substances. They don't do any thinking. There's no thinking going on when a bit of electricity is jumping between axons in your brain, right? Or up your nerves. That's just not what thinking is, according to Descartes. That's just physical, mechanistic electricity moving. And so it's unclear how a physical event like stubbing your toe could ever cause a mental event like a feeling of pain. Because the mental event, the feeling is supposed to be something that takes place in your mind. That's a mental, almost emotional response. The feeling is in your mind, but the stubbing of the toe is a physical event. And so how could a physical event cause a mental event? Ultimately, this is Princess Elizabeth's objection. It's like, it's just not clear to her how it could be possible for a mental substance to cause a physical event, or for some physical event to bring about some property in a mental substance, like a mental event. So from this view that Elizabeth presents, we can get this what I'll call the causal interaction argument. The causal interaction argument is a problem for Cartesian dualism, for the view that you're a soul, that your soul is somehow ultimately distinct from your body. And so here's how the argument goes. Premise one: if I can raise my arm, then I can cause a physical event. Premise two: I can raise my arm. Subconclusion, premise three: so I can cause a physical event. And that follows by premises 1 and 2. It's just what's called modus ponens. All right, with 3 in hand, we can go to premise 4. If something can cause a physical event, then that thing must be a physical substance. That seems plausible to follow from Descartes' view of what a physical substance is. then from 3 and 4, we can then get that I must be a physical substance, right? If I can cause a physical event, then I can cause a physical substance, so I must be a physical substance. That follows by 3 and 4. With 5 in hand, we've got 6. No mental substance is a physical substance. This seems like something that Descartes accepted. Finally, so 7. So from 5 and 6, I am not a mental substance. So this is an argument that says, okay, because of causal interaction, if it's possible, if it's true that I can raise my arm, then I can cause a physical event. And ultimately, if I can cause physical events, then it's going to turn out that I'm not a mental substance at all. So this is an argument against the Cartesian view, because it says that I am not a mental substance. And the Cartesian view is that I am a mental substance. All right, so just a general reminder, because these arguments are valid, that means that the conclusion follows from the premises. The conclusion is true if the premises are true. And that means that it's not possible for you to just deny the conclusion and be like, I don't like the argument, and move on. If you think that the argument is wrong, like if you think that the conclusion of the argument is wrong, and you're like, hey, I like Descartes' view, I think I am a mental substance, then what you have to do is you have to pick a premise to deny. You have to pick one of 1 through 6 to get rid of, because if you think 1 through 6 is false, then you have a reason for thinking that 7 doesn't follow, right? Because, it does follow, but that 7 is false also. So so just sort of, what you have to do is you have to deny a premise if you're going to deny this argument. So then you should look and try and think, okay, what premise do I want to deny? Now, you've got to be careful, though, because this argument involves subconclusions. Subconclusions are 3 and 5 here. Anything that's got the word therefore or so in front of it, you can always think of as a subconclusion. And subconclusions follow from their, the other premises that lead up to them, right? So subconclusion 3 follows from 1 and 2, and subconclusion 5 follows from 3 and 4. So if you're going to deny 3 or 5, you have to deny one of the things that it follows from, right? So this becomes trouble. If you deny 5, and then you're like, okay, well, so if I deny 5, I have to deny either 3 or 4, and then you deny 3, well, then you have to also deny either 1 or 2. So if you're going to deny 5 and then 3, you might as well just deny 3 and then figure out whether 1 or 2, which of 1 or 2 is wrong. So ultimately, if you want to deny a good premise in this argument, you should probably try to deny either 1, 2, 4, or 6. That is, so if you want to deny 3, subconclusion 3, you need to deny either 1 or 2. If you deny 5 but accept subconclusion 3, you need to deny 4. And if you deny 7 but accept subconclusion 5, which also involves accepting 3, then you need to argue against subconclusion 6, or not premise 6. So that's just, this is giving some background on like how it is that you would need to argue against this view. This is sort of technical stuff, but hopefully this will help when it comes to writing your paper. And the way that this works is going to be exactly the same for each of the arguments that I present in each of the following theories of the mind. All right, so how do you argue against an argument of this sort? Well, let's go ahead and try it out. It's a little bit difficult, but here's how you should think about it. So here's the first part of the argument, right? Here's the first part of the argument. It says, if I can raise my arm, then I can cause a physical event. I can raise my arm, so I can cause a physical event. Looks like a really plausible and straightforward argument. So if we're going to argue against one of these premises, we're going to pick a premise and we got to figure out how to deny it, right? So 3 is the subconclusion, and we're just treating it in this context as the conclusion of this part of the argument. So I got to pick between 1 and 2 to try and deny and how to and come up with a reason to think that it's false. So how would I do it? Well, one way would be to deny premise 1. And, this maybe is, I don't know if it's really plausible to do that, but this is how you should think when going through these arguments and trying to figure out if you can deny a premise. And here's what you do, right? So if I'm going to deny premise one, what am I going to do? Well, premise one is a conditional premise. That is, it starts with an if and ends with a then, right? It's if then. It says on the basis of this condition, then blah, right? And on a conditional premise, the only way that you can really deny those premises is you have to come up with a scenario in which the first part of the premise is true, the if part is true, and the then part of the premise is false. That way, you actually show that the whole sentence is false because you break the connection between the condition at the first part and the happening and the second part, right? So what would that be like? Well, in this case, premise one says, if I can raise my arm, then I can cause a physical event. And what I need to do in order to argue that that premise is false is I need to give an example in which it's possible or true that I can raise my arm, but that I can't cause a physical event. So, question, is it possible for me to raise my arm, but not thereby cause a physical event? That seems rather implausible, right? If I can raise my arm, then I can cause a physical event. It seems like raising my arm just is a physical event, right? I mean, like, maybe if I'm not physical, my arm isn't physical. Maybe if my arm is like immaterial, but I mean, whatever it is that we mean by physical when I'm looking at my arm, that's what it is. So even if I'm like, a brain in a vat or something, don't worry too much about that. My arm is physical, whatever it is that we mean by physical here. So this seems like a premise that'd be pretty difficult to deny. So what about premise two? Is it possible that I could deny premise two? So premise two is really straightforward, right? It says I can raise my arm. And premise two, when combined with premise one, gets us to subconclusion three that says I can cause physical events. But can I deny premise two? Is it really, can I reject that I can raise my arm? Well, and actually, denying this premise has been actually explored by some people. So Leibniz, famously of Leibniz's law, right? The guy that we've talked a bit about and has this law that everybody seems to use about identity. Well, he actually thought that on the basis of this kind of Cartesian argument in the interaction problem, he ultimately denied that it was possible for me to raise my arm. And the way that he did this was this. He thought, look, we should accept dualism. We should think of our mental substances as distinct from our physical substances. But what we should do is we should accept God's perfect harmony for the universe. So what we should be thinking about is something like this. God created the universe and all of the physical stuff in the universe, and God created our minds. God set our minds in motion and set the physical world in motion. And insofar as he did that, he created a perfect harmony where whenever I think about my arm going up, the physical world is such that my arm goes up, right? Now, so these two worlds are in a certain sense like disconnected. There's no connection between my thinking about my arm going up and my arm going up. But God sort of is the master clock builder, and he set all these things up in perfect harmony, knowing the future and the past, and such that, like, in such a way that, he knew when I was going to think about my arm going up, and so my arm in the physical world was going to go up right at that time. So according to Leibniz, under this way of thinking, I mean, and this is a very implausible, I think, general argument, but, it's his way of thinking. He denies premise two, that I can raise my arm. And what he says is, well, I can think about raising my arm, but God is really who raises my arm, right? God is the thing that raises my arm, because my arm in the physical universe is not under my control, my mental control at all. So you can deny premise two here, and say, well, actually, no, I can't raise my arm. And so ultimately you could deny the argument and still accept dualism. Now, the problem with denying premise two here is that seems somewhat implausible and quite a radical stretch, right? To have to accept both dualism and the existence of God and God's perfect harmony, right? Like, the fact that God would set these things up, like why would God set things up like this? Like, why wouldn't God just make it the case that somehow my mind could control my body? Why would he have to set up these two different worlds, these two different realms, the mental realm and the physical realm, and then like let them go as clocks, like side by side? Like, why would he do that? Why wouldn't he have there be some kind of interaction between the two? Um, if God's all powerful, it just doesn't, it's one of those weird things, and ultimately Leibniz ends up buying it. But it's a way out. It's a way out of the argument. It just isn't terribly plausible. All right. Next part of the argument. So what about, say you buy premises 1 and 2 and 3. Well, then what if you want to deny 5, or get out of the argument by denying 5, and you could do that by denying premise 4. What would it be to deny premise 4? So premise 4 says if something can cause a physical event, then that thing must be a physical substance. So again, this is a conditional premise. And in order to deny a conditional premise, what you have to do is figure out a scenario in which the first part of the premise is true and the second part of the premise is false. So come up with a scenario in which it's true that something can cause a physical event, but it's false that thing must be a physical substance, right? So something that's, it's true that it can cause a physical event, but it's not a physical substance. Is it possible for such a thing to be? Well, yes, maybe. I mean, so some dualists deny the problem of interaction by positing a special kind of interaction between the mind and body. I mean, in a way, if you already believe in God, you might really think this is a way of going, right? God isn't a purely physical being, but God has control over all physical stuff. And so, God can cause a special interaction to occur, because God is a special interaction between, the non-physical and the physical. Descartes himself kind of thought this, right? He postulated a third kind of fundamental stuff that exists in the world, which just is the interaction between minds and bodies. So he ends up actually not really being purely a dualist in a way. It's funny. He ends up being committed to both minds, bodies, and this magical special interaction between minds and bodies. And he said, he gives some reasons for thinking that this interactive stuff exists, right? He says, like, look, it's clear as day. When we perceive our arm going up, like, we experience our minds controlling our bodies. And when we stub our toes, we experience our bodies affecting our minds. And so, that's just this interaction stuff. We know it exists. We know that minds and bodies interact in certain ways, and we know that the interactions exist, but it's mysterious how it occurs, but that's just how it is. Now, postulating the existence of something in order to solve a problem for your theory, that's a way out. It is a way of solving the problem for your theory, but it's often an ad hoc solution to your theory, right? So this, like, think about it this way, right? If you believe in astrology, that is, like, if you believe in astrology, then you think something like the way that the stars were aligned when you were born is going to affect your life in some way. Now, suppose, you believe in astrology, and then a bunch of scientists come around and they show that the way that the stars are aligned, there's no causal effect that we can tell. There's no gravity or strong and weak force or magnetic effect between the way that the stars are and the way that you are when you were born. Now it seems like that would show, given current physics, that there couldn't be possibly any effect of the stars and how they're aligned on how your life is going to go after you're born. But suppose you're like, wait a minute, no, I believe in astrology. So what I'm going to do in order to solve the problem is postulate a mystical force, a mystical force that nobody can ever see and nobody can ever feel, but it has an effect. And the mystical force depends upon how the stars are aligned and where I am when I'm born. Well, I mean, okay, yeah, so you can postulate the mystical force, but does that really give us any kind of explanation? That seems like what's called an ad hoc solution to a problem, right? If your theory has a problem and you just come up with something and that something is just the fix-all for your theory, well, that seems a little too easy, doesn't it? In that case, if you're appealing to a mysterious solution, you haven't really explained things at all. So what you should try not, if you're trying to explain something, to ever appeal to a mysterious solution. I mean, in the end, explanation does bottom out at some point, and things are mysterious, right? Like, why do people exist? Why does anything exist at all? It's a very good question. It's a mystery of the universe. Why the universe exists, but at bottom, if you're trying to explain something, that if you're trying to give a theory, you shouldn't then at the bottom of your theory just be like, well, it's a mystery and I don't have to explain the mystery. I mean, if you do that, then you haven't really given a theory. You've just said it's mysterious. All right, what about arguing against premise 6? Suppose you accept subconclusion 3 and subconclusion 5, well, but you still deny the conclusion 7. You can deny premise 6, and this might be an interesting way to go. So denying premise 6 would be to say that some mental substances can be physical substances, or that, maybe all mental substances are physical substances. And in that way, you could say something like, well, I'm a physical substance and I'm also a mental substance. The issue there would be that this denies dualism. And so this denies dualism insofar as dualism says that mental and physical substances are distinct, right? So if you deny dualism here, then you're just not on board with Descartes' solution. So I mean, it's also possible that we can, in this case, accept the argument, but say that I'm both mental and physical, right? Say that no mental substance is a physical substance, but that what I am is a mental substance and a physical substance. But this also denies Descartes' view in the first place, right? To say that I am both a mental substance and a physical substance, right? That accepts conclusion 7, right? Because I'm not a mental substance alone. I am both a mental substance and a physical substance. But that doesn't accept Descartes' view. Descartes' view is that I am a mind. I am a soul. I am not my body. Whereas this view would say, oh no, I am a mind in a body. That is what I am. And maybe my mind, my soul can be detached from my body, but that would no longer be me. That would just be part of me, right? That's a view that you could have, but that's not this view. Again, though, denying premise 6 would be to say something like, well, no, look, mental substances can be physical substances. It's just, you have to get a sufficiently complicated physical substance to get a mental substance out of it, right? Like, our brains are super complicated physical systems. And, if your brain is in a particular situation, then you get a mind, you get consciousness out of it, and you get this extra stuff. You get this mental stuff that's also, that's reducible to this physical stuff, but it comes into existence when this physical stuff is sufficiently situated in such a way. But so ultimately that is a view. You could deny the argument there, and you could say, no, look, what I am is both a mental and physical substance, even though no mental substance is a physical substance. Or I mean, no, you're denying premise 6. Sorry, you're saying mental substances are physical substances, and so you could get out of this and still claim that you are a mind or soul. You just have to say then that minds or souls are physical in the end. Great. That's so that's all of the ways that you could get out of this argument. That is all of the ways that you could argue against this argument. And so, looking forward to your papers, if you're trying to, if you're going to argue with this argument, then pick one of those premises and elaborate on the ways in which I was just talking about how you could try to deny the premise, right? Try to deny the premise by arguing against it, uh, trying to come up with a way in which you can accept everything else in the argument, but deny the conclusion by denying one of the premises. All right, I'm going to stop here, and in the next video, we're going to talk about the second mind view, which is Locke's theory of memory, and what you are answers what you are by saying that what you are is your consciousness.